insight into what exactly are we talking about when we say the name Surveillance Technology Oversight Project, and what sort of initiated the thought process of having STOP?
Yeah, as you know, I've been a civil rights lawyer here in New York for a number
Yes.
of years, and I was privileged enough to have a position at CARE New York, heading up their legal work and advocacy work for
Right.
the last 2.5 years. And when I was there, I saw that there was a need for an organization to push back at the way the NYPD and other local and state level police departments
Right.
use surveillance technology. And by that I mean everything from cameras on the streets to new technology that tracks our phone, tracks where we are, tracks what we're saying, tracks what we're researching, and trying to make sure that those powerful tools, sometimes the same tools that the military uses, aren't used in a way that discriminates against communities of color, immigrant communities, and the Muslim community.
Right. So let's talk a little bit more about this since we sort of brought into it. As your website says, STOP talks about harnessing technology and targeting surveillance. So for all our audiences, the surveillance we're talking about, according to STOP, is the fact that at times, as you said, Albert, people from minorities, Muslim immigrants, even the black minorities, are targeted or discriminated against, and surveillance is used against them.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what you are saying, that they are being targeted and tracked because they are a minority or because they're looked as somebody that I guess that need to be, surveillance at. So what's your opinion on this? And exactly why do you think the minorities are being, targeted in that aspect?
Yeah, the numbers here in New York are really telling. At a time when the New Zealand shooting shows us that white supremacist terrorism is one of the leading threats to national security,
Right.
here in New York, 95% of NYPD intelligence investigations, 95% target Muslim New Yorkers. And at the same time, we also know that peaceful political movements in the African American community, like Black Lives Matter, are also targeted with warrantless surveillance. And because of that, we have a clear picture that New York is using this arsenal of spy equipment not to target the threat, but to target communities of color, to target immigrant communities, and to target the Muslim community.
Do you think this increases xenophobia? Is that one of the issues that you would be tackling with STOP? Do you believe that surveillance and targeting in this aspect directly impact these communities in a negative way?
Of course, 100%, because when we see these communities treated as a threat, not because of what they have done, but because of who they are,
Right.
It perpetuates a cycle of stigmatization. We see the Muslim community in particular being stigmatized as a threat simply for their faith, for nothing else. And it's something that's been going on in New York City for over 15 years. Here we used to have a focus on in-person surveillance.
Right.
Undercover officers and informants who would go into the mosques and see who was going to pray. They would actually go through neighborhoods and try to map out where Muslim communities lived. This was called the demographics unit. And that was an earlier version of surveillance back when you needed in-person informants in order to monitor who was where. But
Right.
now so much of that same surveillance can be carried out simply by looking at the data on our phones, simply by looking at the cameras on our streets and harnessing these new surveillance tools. And we at STOP think that it is wrong to have those tools used without proper oversight, without proper safeguards.
Just taking off of this, everything that STOP is talking about, and especially what has happened sort of in the world in the last week on Muslim sentiments, on immigrant sentiments, on the concept of xenophobia and so much more, I would like for you to make a comment on behalf of STOP on what happened with the mass shooting in New Zealand. So I would like for you to give a comment on this.
Look, as a Jewish man who has been fighting for the Muslim community for many years, who has been an interfaith advocate for my entire adult life, it's heartbreaking when I see a place of faith, a place of safety, a place of community, turned into a crime scene. When I see those photos of those,
Right.
the the small children, you know, the elderly, everyone just being targeted, being killed because of their faith. I don't know if there are words that can fully capture that. But what I think I have taken away from the last few days has been just incredible awe at the resilience I see from my Muslim brothers and sisters every day in the face of this sort of hate. And at least here in New York, I see renewed reason for optimism that we have solidarity to come together in these moments. That in the darkness following this brutal attack, that there is a willingness of New Yorkers of every faith, of every race, of every ethnicity to come together and say that we will stand united as a city in the face of this sort of bloodshed.
Do you believe that perhaps it might be a time for a global empowerment for the Muslim community, with so much happening everywhere and so much said in so many parts of the world? What is your opinion on this? What do you think really needs to be said about them? Because obviously there is so much hatred that's being shown.
I can't speak to the global Muslim community. Obviously, as an ally, there are limits to what is proper for me to say. But what I do think is important is that every single person of goodwill around the world needs to stand up and denounce this sort of white supremacy. That it is not simply enough to be casually condemning it. It's not enough to simply not share those views. We must all actively band together and denounce it.